Welcome to Top 10 Secret, where the most haunting ghost stories are revealed. Do you dare step into a world of terrifying mysteries, where ghost stories don't just give you chills but haunt your mind forever? At Top 10 Secret, we bring you eerie supernatural encounters, shadowy figures lurking in the night, deadly curses, and unexplained disappearances. Each video takes you deep into the darkest corners of the unknown, where reality and nightmares blur together. Are you ready to face your fears? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the most haunting horror stories. Story 1. The Horrifying Darkness. Have you ever wondered how terrifying the world would be if you could see the cause of someone's death? Today, I'm going to tell you a strange story. A chilling experience while shopping late at night. Don't forget to drop a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next haunting stories. The Horrifying Darkness. A cold gust of wind slipped through the crack in the door, carrying the damp, heavy scent of the night. I stood at the checkout counter, unease creeping up my spine as I sensed something was off. Under the dim fluorescent light, my gaze locked onto the cashier in front of me. A shiver ran through my body as I realized his face was no longer intact. The left side of his skull was nearly crushed, with torn flesh exposing shattered bone fragments. Thick blackened blood still oozed from the corner of his eye, trailing down his uniform collar. His right ear was barely there, a deep gash stretching down to his jaw as if he had suffered a brutal impact. The sight made my stomach clench, my breath hitching in my throat. I forced myself to stay calm, telling myself I was just exhausted, or maybe the store's lighting was playing tricks on me. But no. The hollow stare he gave me was undeniable. His eyes clouded and lifeless, void of any trace of existence. A suffocating weight pressed down on me. My heart pounded violently, each beat slamming against my ribs as if it were about to burst. Silently, he rang up my items, his trembling hands twisted and contorted in a way that made me question how he could even hold anything. When he handed me my change, his bony fingers barely brushed against mine, ice cold, like touching a block of frozen flesh. A shudder ran through me, and I instinctively yanked my hand back. The chill spread through my arm, as if I had made contact with something that didn't belong to this world. 1 second, 2 seconds. The space around me suddenly fell into an eerie silence. The store's background music had vanished. No footsteps from other customers. Everything had frozen in place, trapped in an endless, unnatural stillness. I wanted to turn away, to leave immediately, but my legs refused to move, locked in place by an invisible force. Slowly, I forced myself to take a step back, desperate to escape the weight of that lifeless stare. The store seemed to shrink around me, its walls pressing inward, drowning me in an unbearable, unseen pressure. I inhaled deeply, but the air was thick, suffocating, constricting my lungs as if I were being strangled. As I neared the exit, my eyes flickered toward a magazine rack. A man stood there, casually flipping through a magazine, appearing perfectly normal. But the moment I looked at his face, my entire body froze. His skin was no longer the color of life. It was charred black, cracked and peeling, revealing raw, seared flesh underneath. Deep, jagged fractures ran from his forehead to his chin, as if he had been burned beyond recognition. His fingers were in the same condition, scorched down to the bone, nothing but blackened remains. Panic surged up my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs betrayed me once again, rooted to the spot. My heart pounded so hard I could feel every tremor reverberating through my chest. I swallowed hard, spinning away in hopes of escaping the horror before me. But I'd made a mistake. Right beside me, a woman stood still, her wide eyes staring directly at me, streaks of dried blood on her cheeks. Around her neck, a deep purple bruise wrapped tightly, the unmistakable mark of something that had strangled her to death. My throat tightened. I couldn't breathe. Ice-cold fear slithered through my veins as I realized she was aware of me. She was looking at me. Terror reached its peak. I nearly dropped everything in my hands and bolted toward the door. The night outside swallowed me whole, its chilling wind howling through the empty streets. My legs nearly gave out as I reached my car, breath coming in ragged gasps, cold sweat soaking my forehead. On the deserted road, only my reflection stared back at me from the car's window. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself it was all just an illusion, just exhaustion. But when my gaze accidentally drifted to the rearview mirror, I saw myself. With a deep, dark bruise wrapped around my neck. Was I already dead? My stomach twisted the moment my eyes met the cashier's shattered face. The faint metallic scent of blood lingered in the air, stirring every sense that was desperately trying to deny the horrifying reality before me. My throat went dry. My breathing turned shallow, as if the air around me was slowly being drained away. A wave of nausea surged from the pit of my stomach, forcing me to clench my fists to keep myself from collapsing right then and there. The sight before me was too gruesome to ignore. Half of his head looked as if it had been crushed by an immense force, exposing fragments of white bone between mangled flesh. Blood seeped from his empty eye socket, trickling down his pallid skin and staining his already crimson-soaked collar. With every passing second, an overwhelming sense of dread coiled tighter around me, gripping me like an invisible hand. I swallowed hard, struggling to steady my breath, but my stomach churned again as I noticed his right ear, barely hanging onto his skull by a few fragile strands of torn flesh. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to erase the monstrous image from my mind. But the harder I tried to forget, the deeper it burned into my consciousness. A wave of dizziness crashed over me, my head spinning as if I had been sucked into an inescapable nightmare. The air in the store suddenly felt thick and oppressive, weighing heavily on my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I staggered a step back, desperate to keep my balance, but the sickening nausea refused to let go. Then, his icy hand brushed against mine as he handed me my change, and I jolted violently. That chilling touch, it wasn't just cold, it was unnatural. It felt like pressing my skin against a stone buried under layers of snow, devoid of any warmth. Instinctively, I yanked my hand away, my palms slick with cold sweat. The nausea in my gut twisted into something unbearable when I glanced down at his hand. His fingers were grotesquely curled, swollen and bruised, his nails torn and jagged as if he had desperately clawed at something before his death. I had to get out of here, right now. I turned away, but my entire body froze when my gaze accidentally caught my own reflection in the glass door. I looked pale, my wide eyes filled with sheer terror, my face drained of all color. But that wasn't what sent my blood running cold. It was what stood behind me. The cashier was still there, unmoving. But in the reflection, he wasn't just standing still. He was looking at me. No, that's impossible. I spun around, but his disfigured face remained expressionless, his gaze cast downward at the register, as if he had never moved at all. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to breathe. Maybe I was just panicking too much, my mind playing tricks on me. But my body didn't listen to reason. My hands trembled, my breath came in ragged gasps, and my stomach threatened to betray me at any moment. I could no longer suppress the nausea rising in my throat. The overwhelming horror pressed down on me like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, suffocating me in its relentless grip. I had to leave. Now, but just as I took a step back, I realized something. The store had fallen into an eerie silence. The usual background music had vanished. There were no footsteps from other customers, no rustling of shopping bags. It was as if the entire world had been stripped away, leaving only me and the grotesque entities surrounding me. A shiver ran down my spine as I heard it. A faint, rasping sound. A breath, weak yet heavy. coming from behind the counter. This time, I didn't turn around. I ran. I bolted toward the door, my nausea reaching its peak, but I didn't dare stop. I couldn't bear to see anything else. I just had to get out before something or someone touched me again. I forced myself to swallow, trying to push down the lingering nausea in my throat. My body trembled uncontrollably as I stood face to face with the cashier. The horrifying image of his mutilated face still haunted me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I just needed to take my change and leave immediately. The cashier didn't say a word. He simply reached into the cash drawer, slowly flipping through the bills like a soulless machine. But when his hand extended toward me, I froze. His fingers were no longer normal. They were twisted unnaturally, the joints jutting out as if they had been broken but never healed. His skin was pale, almost translucent, exposing dark, bluish veins running along his arm. His fingernails were disturbingly long, cracked, and jagged, as if he had clawed at something so desperately that they had splintered. A deep crimson stain, still fresh, clung to the tips of his fingers. Blood. There was no mistaking it. My breathing quickened. My heart pounded violently, threatening to break free from my chest. A chilling sensation crawled down my spine as I noticed something else. His hand was trembling. Not from weakness, but as if it was resisting something. As if it was struggling against an unseen force, fighting to break free from its owner's control. What should I do? Should I take the money? I didn't want to touch that hand. An instinctive fear surged through me, screaming that I shouldn't make contact with whatever this was. But I also knew that if I stood frozen for even another second, I might lose my mind from the sheer terror of it all. I had to get out of here. Taking a deep breath, I clenched my teeth and snatched the money from that deformed hand as quickly as I could. A piercing cold shot through my palm the instant his fingertips brushed against my skin. It felt like hundreds of tiny needles stabbing into my flesh in a single fleeting moment. I yanked my hand back instantly, stumbling a step backward. My eyes instinctively dropped to the bills in my grasp. Something wasn't right. The money stuck together slightly, the texture damp as if someone had clutched it too tightly for too long. A strange discomfort spread through me. I wanted to throw the bills away, to rid myself of them immediately, but I knew that would only make things worse. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. The cashier remained silent. He stood there, unmoving, his vacant eyes staring straight through me as if I weren't even there. A shiver coursed through my body as I realized his hand was still outstretched in the same position, his thin, bony fingers still extended, as if he was waiting for me to take something else. I couldn't bear to look anymore. I turned away, walking quickly, but the eerie sensation clung to me like a shadow. I needed to get out of here. My footsteps echoed unnervingly in the suffocating silence. I could feel someone's eyes following me, but I didn't dare turn around. The store suddenly felt much longer than I remembered. The aisles stretched endlessly, the exit still too far away. Each step grew heavier, as if an invisible hand was holding me back. I tried to move faster, but the cold creeping up my spine made it almost impossible to breathe. Something was wrong. I forced myself forward. Just get to the door, and I'll be safe. But as I passed the magazine rack near the exit, I stopped. A man stood there, flipping through a magazine. His figure seemed ordinary at first glance, but something was off. A terrible sense of dread swelled inside me, but I didn't dare look directly. I wanted to keep walking, but that cursed curiosity made me steal a quick glance. Just for a second. And I regretted it immediately. His skin wasn't intact. It was scorched, charred flesh shriveling away to expose blackened bone underneath. His fingers trembled as he turned the page, bits of burned skin peeling off and sticking to the magazine, leaving dark stains on the crisp white paper. My heart stopped. A wave of dizziness hit me, and before I could gather my senses, the man slowly turned his head toward me. I froze. His eyes were no longer human. They were deep, hollow voids, endless, consuming, pulling me into an abyss of nothingness. My fingers clenched around the cold, damp bills in my hand, my palms slick with sweat. I could feel them sticking to my skin as if unseen spirits were grasping onto me, refusing to let go. I couldn't take it anymore. A silent scream erupted in my mind as I forced my body to move, bolting straight for the door, leaving everything behind. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. I only knew that if I stayed here 1 second longer, I would never leave this place again. My footsteps pounded against the floor as I rushed toward the door, my breath ragged, my heart hammering wildly as if it was about to explode in my chest. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see anything else. The nausea still churned in my stomach, my hands trembling as they clenched around the icy cold bills. I just needed to get out of here. Then I would be safe. The air outside felt lighter compared to the suffocating heaviness inside the store. A cold breeze swept past, carrying the breath of the night, but it did nothing to calm me. I still felt it, something unseen trailing behind me, lurking just out of sight, matching my every step. I tightened my fists, trying to shake off the eerie sensation crawling up my spine. But just as I was about to step onto the sidewalk outside, I froze. Beyond the glass doors, standing beneath the dim glow of a street lamp, was a man. At first, I thought he was just a homeless drifter lingering in the night. But then I realized something was terribly, horribly wrong. His body was unlike anything I had ever seen before. His skin was charred black, cracked and split open like he had been burned alive but somehow remained standing. Deep, gaping burns stretched from his neck down his arms, exposing shriveled flesh and scorched bone beneath. The streetlight cast shadows across his disfigured face, highlighting the dry, jagged crevices where his flesh had been burned to the bone. I stood frozen. It felt as though the temperature around me had suddenly plummeted, despite the night wind still whispering through the streets. The man didn't move, but his eyes, if they could even be called that, were locked onto me. There were no irises, no pupils, just two empty voids, endless and consuming, as if they could swallow my soul if I looked for too long. I instinctively stepped back. He remained motionless. But no, that wasn't possible. I swore he had gotten closer, not by stepping forward. His posture hadn't changed, but as if the space between us had simply collapsed in an instant. My throat was dry. My heart thundered in my chest. I had to get away. Now. But my body wouldn't obey. I felt trapped in his gaze, paralyzed by a force I couldn't comprehend. Then, slowly, he tilted his head to the side, as if studying me. And ever so deliberately, he raised his arm. His burned skin peeled away with the movement, revealing the blackened muscle beneath. His fingers, long, twisted, like charred branches, shook as they reached toward me. I couldn't take it anymore. I spun on my heels and bolted through the door, my feet barely touching the ground. I didn't care where I was running. I just needed to be far, far away from that thing. My breath came in ragged gasps, my body screaming in pure terror. But I couldn't stop. I didn't dare look back. I knew that if I did, I would see something I could never unsee. But even as I ran, I could still feel it. That icy presence clinging to me like a shadow, relentless and inescapable. I didn't hear footsteps behind me, but I knew it was there. The darkness ahead seemed thicker than before, as if the very night itself was closing in on me. I ran until my legs went numb, until my lungs burned with every desperate breath. But that suffocating dread never faded. For a fleeting moment, I thought I had escaped. Then, suddenly, I felt it, right behind me, cold, charred. The stench of burnt flesh filled my nostrils, and then his hand touched me. I felt an unbearable cold seep into every cell of my body, even as cold sweat drenched the back of my shirt. My heart was still pounding from the sight of the charred man standing motionless at the door. I had run. I had tried to escape, but the feeling of being watched refused to let me go. The night wind swept through the empty alley, carrying the scent of damp decay mixed with something faintly metallic and nauseating. I couldn't quite place what it was, but it made my stomach churn. The air felt thick, heavy, suffocating. I needed to find a way out, a street with lights, a place with people anywhere but here. My chest ached from running too fast, and I forced myself to steady my breath to stay calm. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was just panicking too much, right? Something deep inside me screamed that this was real. Every last bit of it. Slowly, I turned my head, praying I wouldn't see anything unnatural again. But the moment my eyes landed on the figure at the far end of the alley, an icy shiver shot down my spine. A woman. She stood against a cracked, crumbling wall, her long, disheveled hair covering most of her face. Her body was thin, frail, draped in old, tattered clothing that clung to her skin. But it was when she lifted her head that I felt my blood run cold. Her eyes. They bulged from their sockets, red veins webbing across the whites like they were ready to burst. The milky, lifeless hue of her irises sent a jolt of terror straight through me. No, this wasn't just a vacant stare. It was like she was looking straight through me, piercing into my very soul. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. A dark, ghastly bruise wrapped around her throat like a coiled serpent, spreading across her pale skin. I recognized that mark instantly, the unmistakable imprint of a noose. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no denying what stood before me. The wind stirred again, lifting strands of her hair, revealing more bruises running down her neck and collarbone. She had struggled. Violently. No. I didn't want to think about it. I had to get out. I took a step back, and then she moved. Not by walking, not by running. She glided. Her feet never lifted off the ground, yet her body drifted forward, closing the distance between us in an impossible, unnatural way. I stood frozen, helpless as she came closer and closer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my mouth refused to open, and my legs felt chained to the ground. She stopped, just inches from me. The stench of decay hit me like a tidal wave. My vision blurred with fear as I watched the corners of her lips slowly curl upward. A smile, a twisted, unnatural grin, stretched so wide it looked like her face might tear apart. Then, she opened her mouth. What came out wasn't a voice, not a scream, but a rasping, guttural sound, like a rope tightening around a throat. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed, flailing my arms to shove her away, but my hands passed through nothing but freezing air. She wasn't real. Or maybe she was, just not part of this world. Finally, I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from that stare. But as I burst out of the alley, just when I thought I was safe, a cold hand gripped my shoulder. My heart felt like it was about to explode, each frantic beat so loud I swore I could hear it echo through the silent night. My skin was ice cold, my legs trembling, barely able to keep me standing. I couldn't stay here another second. I had to get out of this cursed place. Without thinking, I spun around and bolted toward the parking lot as fast as my legs could carry me. My breath came in ragged gasps, every step feeling like something unseen was dragging me back, as if an invisible hand was reaching for me, ready to grasp the back of my neck at any moment. I didn't dare look back. I just ran. And then, I saw my car. Relief surged through me, but just as I reached for the door handle, a freezing breath ghosted against the back of my neck. My heart plummeted. No. The sensation was so vivid, so real. I could almost hear it breathing. Something was standing right behind me, so close that if I hesitated for even a second, it would touch me. I didn't stop to think. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut. Silence. Outside, nothing. No charred man, no woman with bulging bloodshot eyes, no monsters lurking in the dark, just an empty parking lot under the dim glow of the streetlights. My breath came in short, uneven gasps, my hands shaking so badly that it took me several tries to get the key into the ignition. I didn't care if I was losing my mind. I just knew I had to get the hell out of here. The engine roared to life, a sound so normal yet, at this moment, the sweetest salvation. I gripped the steering wheel tight, slammed my foot on the gas, and sped away, leaving everything I had just witnessed behind. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I was afraid. Afraid that if I did, I would see something I could never unsee. My breathing was still erratic, my body stiff with lingering terror. I kept telling myself I was safe now, that this was just a nightmare I was finally escaping from. Then, as I turned onto the main road, the streetlights flickered out. The entire road plunged into darkness. My pulse stuttered. Why? Why did the lights go out? This was a main road. This shouldn't happen. A wave of unease surged through me, crashing over my feeble attempts at rationalizing the situation. But I kept driving. Maybe it was just a power outage. Maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew better. The air inside the car suddenly felt heavy, like something else was in here with me. My chest tightened, my knuckles turning white as I clenched the steering wheel. This dread, I had felt it before. I took a deep breath, clenched my jaw, forcing myself to push away the irrational thoughts. Then, a shadow darted across the road. Panic exploded in my chest as I slammed on the brakes. Tires screeched, the car skidding violently. I felt the impact. Someone, I had hit them. But when I looked outside, nothing, no one, but I could feel it. Something was here, right beside me. I turned my head. The rearview mirror reflected a face, not mine. A grotesque, twisted visage with wide, milky white eyes staring straight at me. A grin stretched unnaturally, splitting its face apart, and a bruised, mangled neck. I didn't have time to scream. Everything went black. Story 2. The Spirit in the Attic. Do you believe in strange photos? Today's story is about Lily, who accidentally captured a mysterious figure while cleaning out her grandmother's attic. What is the truth behind that photo? Don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next terrifying stories. Lily never imagined that a simple attic cleanup at her grandmother's house would turn into a haunting memory that would stay with her forever. That day, the sky was overcast, and the wind howled through the cracks in the windows, creating eerie whispers. She cautiously stepped up the creaky wooden stairs, each step producing a sharp squeak, as if someone unseen was watching. The attic was covered in dust, old belongings lying still under thick layers of cobwebs, seemingly abandoned for decades. As Lily scanned the dimly lit room, a small, dust-covered object in the corner caught her eye. It was an old camera with peeling leather and a cloudy lens reflecting the faint light from the tiny attic window. She picked it up, and her heart pounded strangely. Whose camera was this? Why had it been left here? Curiosity urged her to check inside. To her surprise, the film was still intact. A thought flickered in her mind. Why not take a few pictures? She lifted the camera, pressed the shutter, and the soft click echoed in the still air. Lily moved the lens across the room, capturing the old furniture, the forgotten trunks, the dust-laden corners. Every time she pressed the shutter, a strange sensation washed over her, as if someone stood behind her, silently watching. But she quickly brushed the feeling aside. She wasn't one to believe in superstitions. After finishing, she left the attic, unaware that she had just captured a terrifying secret. A few days later, Lily decided to have the film developed. She was eager to see the nostalgic images stored in the old camera. When the shop returned the photos, she flipped through them with a small smile, until she reached one picture that made her heart stop. It was a photo of the darkest corner of the attic, a place she distinctly remembered being empty except for a few dusty chests. But in the image, standing right behind her, was a shadowy figure. A faint, misty silhouette, featureless, but unmistakably there. A chill crawled down Lily's spine, and every hair on her body stood on end. She immediately glanced around the room, even though she knew she was alone. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, her breath coming in uneven gasps. Desperately, she zoomed in on the image, hoping it was just a trick of the light or a smudge on the film. But no. The figure remained, clearer and more unsettling than before. Panic surged through her. She racked her brain, trying to recall the exact moment she took that picture. She had been alone. No one had been with her. So, who was that figure? Lily felt an icy dread seep into her bones. She rushed to her grandmother's house, determined to find answers. As she entered the living room, her voice trembled as she asked, "Grandma, has anyone ever lived in the attic before?" Her grandmother stiffened, a shadow of unease crossing her face. A heavy silence filled the air before she finally spoke in a hushed, raspy voice. "Did you see something up there?" Lily hesitated, then slowly pulled the photograph from her pocket and handed it over. Her grandmother's hands trembled as she took it, her aged eyes widening in horror. "No, this can't be," she whispered, her voice laced with fear. Lily's stomach churned. "Grandma, do you know who this is?" A sudden gust of wind rushed through the window, causing the curtains to billow as if something had just passed by. Her grandmother clutched the photo tightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Years ago, I saw a shadow in the attic too. But no one believed me. I always felt something was wrong in this house. But over time, I forced myself to forget." Lily's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. If her grandmother had seen it before, then that meant it was still here, still lurking in this house, still watching. Fear gripped her entire being. She turned slowly toward the staircase leading to the attic. The old wooden door remained shut, but was something waiting inside? And more importantly, would it ever let her go? Lily gently wiped away the thick layer of dust covering the old camera. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she realized that, despite the wear of time, the camera still seemed to be in working condition. A thought crossed her mind. Why not take a few pictures? She adjusted the lens, pressed the shutter, and the dry click echoed through the silent attic. Her heart skipped a beat. She pointed the camera at the aged objects around her. The dust-covered trunks, the faded paintings, the forgotten relics of time. The first picture, an old armchair, its torn fabric revealing rotting wood underneath. It sat at an odd angle, as if someone had just been there and left in a hurry. A chill ran down her spine, but she brushed it off as a silly thought. The second picture, a dark wooden cabinet with its door slightly ajar. Lily didn't recall touching it, but perhaps a draft had nudged it open. She pressed the shutter, and the camera's flash reflected in the cabinet's glass. For a brief moment, she swore she saw something flicker in the reflection. She swallowed hard and glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. Letting out a nervous laugh, she shook her head at her own paranoia. But before her smile could fully form, she noticed something unsettling. The air had suddenly turned colder. The third picture. She aimed the lens at a dimly lit corner of the attic, where a large trunk lay beneath a white sheet. The fabric was stained with age, untouched for what seemed like decades. Lily hesitated, then took the shot. But the moment the click echoed, a sudden icy gust rushed through the attic, whipping the sheet off the trunk. She gasped, heart pounding. No windows were open. Where had the wind come from? Her grip tightened on the camera. In the dim light, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer alone. The shadows cast by the objects stretched across the floor, but one shadow, one faint silhouette, didn't belong to anything in the room. The air grew heavy, pressing against her chest like an unseen force. Lily struggled to steady her breathing, her pulse drumming in her ears. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to ignore the unease. She raised the camera again and snapped another picture, this time of an old clock hanging on the wall. Its hands had long since stopped, the second hand frozen at exactly 12. But the moment the flash went off, tick, tock. The sound echoed through the attic. Lily froze. The clock had just made a noise. Slowly, she turned her gaze to it. No, she must have imagined it. But as she was about to look away, the second hand twitched, then moved. Tick, tock. This time, it didn't stop. The second hand continued to creep forward, steadily, as if some unseen force had just wound time back into motion. Her breath hitched. She took a step backward, her body rigid with dread. A sickening sensation twisted in her gut, warning her that something was terribly wrong. She gripped the camera tighter, instinct screaming at her to run, but something held her back. A strange, compelling urge. She needed to take one more picture. Turning around, she lifted the camera once more, and this time, she took a photo of herself in the dusty mirror across the room. Click. The flash illuminated the space. Lily lowered the camera and looked directly into the mirror. In that moment, her heart nearly stopped. Reflected in the glass, standing right behind her, was a shadowy figure. It didn't have a face, just a dark, undefined shape blending into the surrounding darkness. Lily spun around instantly, but behind her was nothing. No one. A deep, bone-chilling dread washed over her. Her fingers trembled as she hastily checked the camera's display. The image was exactly as she had seen it in the mirror. The figure was still there, and it was watching her. Lily sat on her bed, her heart still pounding from what had happened in the attic. She flipped through the photos she had just taken, studying every detail with wide, anxious eyes. Everything looked normal, except for one thing that made it impossible to breathe. The last photo, the one she had taken in the mirror. Right behind her stood a dark figure. No face, no distinct features, just a shadowy presence, silent and blurred, lurking in the dimly lit corner. She couldn't believe her eyes. She had been alone in the attic. There was no one else. There couldn't have been. Lily swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edges of the photo. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating. Should she tell someone? Would anyone even believe her? She shot up from the bed, rushed to the door, and hurried downstairs. Her grandmother was sitting in her chair, gazing out the window with a distant look in her eyes. Lily approached, her voice unsteady. "Grandma, can you look at this for me?" Her grandmother turned, her tired eyes scanning Lily's worried face. The moment Lily held out the photo, her grandmother froze. For a long second, her face went pale. Her frail hands trembled as she took the photo, gripping it so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her expression darkened, as if she was recalling something she wished she could forget. Where did you take this?" Her voice was quiet but firm. Lily's throat felt dry. "In the attic. I found an old camera up there. I was just taking some pictures." Her grandmother exhaled sharply, eyes filled with alarm. "Lily, You shouldn't have done that. A shiver ran down Lily's spine. What are you talking about? Her grandmother clutched the photo even tighter, her voice dropping into something almost like a whisper. You're not the first one to see it. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Lily could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. Her grandmother held her gaze for a long moment before looking away, her voice drifting as if lost in memories. Many years ago, I saw it too, a shadow, always standing in the corners, watching. Lily clenched her fists. Where did you see it? Her grandmother inhaled deeply. Her voice was barely audible. In the attic, and in my dreams. Lily's pulse raced. A cold chill ran through her veins. I thought it was just my imagination, until others started seeing it too. Lily's stomach twisted. You mean, other people have seen it? Her grandmother gave a slow, solemn nod. Fear weighed heavily in her eyes. The man who lived in this house before me vanished without a trace. No one ever found him. No explanation. He was just gone. Lily stood frozen, gripping the photo so tightly the paper crumpled beneath her fingers. And now that you've seen it, her grandmother whispered, her voice barely holding together. A deep, unsettling dread spread through Lily's chest. She glanced at the photo again, and for some reason, the shadowy figure seemed more terrifying than before. An eerie sensation crept over her, like unseen eyes were watching her. Right now, the air around her felt different. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded slower, heavier. The darkness outside the window seemed deeper, swallowing the night. Then suddenly, a soft creak echoed from above. Lily froze. Her grandmother's head snapped up, fear flashing in her eyes. Another creak, like footsteps, moving across the attic floor. Lily held her breath, her pulse hammering in her throat. Could it still be up there? The sound grew louder, slow, deliberate. Heavy steps dragging across the old wooden floor. Lily turned to her grandmother, but her face was ashen. Did you hear that? Lily whispered. Her grandmother didn't answer. She just stared up at the ceiling, her lips trembling. And then, at that very moment, a whisper, faint, indistinct, coming from the attic above. The sound slithered through the cracks in the wood, barely more than a breath, but chilling enough to make every hair on Lily's body stand on end. She stepped back, her breathing uneven. Then, silence. The noises were gone, as if they had never been there. But Lily knew. She was no longer alone in this house. Lily couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of unease pressing down on her. The strange noises from the attic still haunted her, like something lurking in the shadows, silently watching, waiting. She knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. She threw herself into work, hoping to distract herself from the fear. But even as she sorted through old belongings, her mind spun with endless questions. What had she really seen in that photo? Was that shadow real? Or just a cruel trick of her imagination? Lily shook her head, forcing herself to stay calm. She opened the box of old film rolls from the antique camera she had found in the attic. Carefully, she removed one and decided to take it to the nearest photo lab for development. Stepping inside the shop, she handed the film to the photo technician, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and hands that spoke of years of experience. "You want this developed?" he asked, glancing at the roll with a slightly puzzled expression. Lily nodded. "Yes, I just want to see what's on it." The man said nothing more, taking the film and disappearing into the back room. Lily stood there, uneasy, unsure if she truly wanted to see these photos at all. 15 minutes later, the technician returned, holding a stack of developed photos. But his face was pale, his eyes clouded with uncertainty and concern. "Where did you take these?" he asked, his tone so serious that Lily felt a cold shiver creep up her spine. She blinked, feeling her palms grow clammy. "At my house, in the attic." "Why?" The man slowly set the stack of photos down on the counter. Lily took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she flipped through them. The first few were ordinary: dust-covered furniture, an old armchair, a wooden cabinet, a worn-out trunk. But when she reached the fourth photo, her heart nearly stopped. In the dim corner of the frame stood a shadowy figure. It was faint, almost blending into the darkness, but its shape was unmistakable. A tall, thin figure standing rigidly, its face absent of any features. Lily felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. She turned to the next photo. The shadow was still there, but this time, it was closer. Lily held her breath. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Another photo. The shadow was now at the very edge of the frame. Her throat tightened. Her hands shook so badly that she almost dropped the photos. The technician watched her carefully. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You're absolutely sure? There was no one else there when you took these?" Lily swallowed hard. "I'm positive." The man was silent for a moment before slowly sliding another photograph toward her. "I think you need to see this one." Lily looked down. The final photo. It was the picture she had taken of herself in the attic mirror. But this time, aside from the shadowy figure lurking behind her, there was something else. Two eyes. Not clear, not fully formed, but unmistakable. Deep within the darkness, two hollow sockets stared back at her through the mirror. Lily felt the world collapse around her. She scrambled to gather the photos, stepping backward as if trying to escape them. Her heart pounded violently, her breath uneven, her entire body ice cold. The technician watched her with concern. "Do you want me to hold on to these for you?" Lily shook her head instantly. I have to go." She rushed out of the shop, not caring about the curious stares from passers-by. There was only one thought in her mind. I can't stay in that house anymore. But when she arrived home, the moment she stepped through the door, she felt the air shift, heavy, suffocating. And then she saw it. On the table in the living room, the stack of photos, the very same ones she had left behind at the shop. A cold wind whispered through the crack of the door, carrying a faint, chilling murmur that echoed in the silence. Lily stood frozen in place. She had left them there. She hadn't brought them back. So how... were they here? Lily stood frozen in front of the table. The photographs lay neatly arranged, as if someone had deliberately placed them there, waiting for her to return. She swallowed hard, trying to convince herself that this was just a coincidence, that she had accidentally taken them with her without realizing it. But no, that was impossible. She had left those photos at the shop. So, who had brought them back? A chill ran down the back of her neck, sending goosebumps across her skin. Lily reached out with a trembling hand, but the moment her fingertips brushed the edge of a photo, an icy gust of wind swept through the room. The windows rattled violently. The photos scattered into the air, falling to the floor in disarray. Lily screamed and stumbled backward. Her wide eyes darted down to the scattered photographs. All of them lay face down, except for one, the mirror photo. But this time, something was different. Lily held her breath, her eyes widening in horror. The dark figure that had been standing behind her in the photo was no longer there. Her blood turned to ice. She stared at the image, desperately trying to convince herself that she was imagining things. But no matter how many times she blinked, the truth remained the same. The shadow was gone from the picture. A terrifying realization gripped her. If it wasn't in the photo anymore, then where was it? A shiver ran through her body. She turned around slowly, a dreadful certainty creeping into her mind. Something was standing behind her. Her throat tightened, her breaths shallow and uneven. The silence in the room was suffocating, so heavy that she could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. And then, a cold hand touched her shoulder. Lily screamed and bolted toward the door. But just as her hand grasped the doorknob, a voice echoed behind her. Hoarse, distorted, as if it came from somewhere far beyond this world. "You saw me." Lily froze. She didn't dare turn around. Her breath hitched, her chest constricting painfully. "Now, I see you too." She couldn't take it anymore. With a desperate twist, she yanked the door open and sprinted outside, running blindly into the night. She ran and ran, never looking back. The road blurred before her, her legs trembling so badly she nearly collapsed. But she didn't stop. She only halted when the streetlights cast their glow over her, when she realized she had escaped that house. Her breath came in frantic gasps as she hugged herself, her entire body still shaking. She had no idea what had just happened, but she knew one thing for certain. She could never go back there again. But then, a horrifying realization struck her. The phone in her pocket was still open on the camera app and on the screen. Standing in the darkness behind her was a shadow.